On this channel over the last year, we've taken an in-depth look at the original Game Boy, the Sega Game Gear, the Sega Nomad, the Virtual Boy, the Neo Geo Pocket Color, and even the Wonder Swan. Yet one handheld is requested for me to take a look at more regularly than any other. And of course, as the thumbnail suggests, that system is none other than the Atari Lynx. The big problem has been though, in order for me to review a system, I of course actually have to own said system in order to form an actual opinion on it. And until very recently, I was yet to acquire an Atari Lynx. All of that changed though last month when I was down under in Australia and I was gifted one to review by fellow YouTuber Since Spacies. Your generosity is most appreciated, sir. So today I'm going to do my best to entertain you on the subject and give everybody at home a bloody good education on the Atari bloody Lynx. Before we get this underway, I just want to reiterate that the Lynx Retrospective is one of my most requested videos on the channel, so it has been extremely interesting researching the history of this thing and playing many of the gems the platform has to offer. Since I have left Australia on my world tour and landed here in Greece, I have been going Lynx mad. I am beginning to completely live and breathe Lynx, and I think I am really starting to learn what all the fuss is all about. It's cheap, it's tacky, but at the end of the day, I suppose it smells quite nice. It comes in a variety of fragrances and acts as a solid deodorant. So if you're going to make yourself smell like a peasant, you may as well make yourself a nice smelling peasant. I am sure it would cover up most of you people who smell of a combination of cigarettes, fried food and wet dog. It's perfect for Jimmy Savile resellers really. To be fair though, this joke didn't even make much sense, as Greece is one of those stupid countries where they call Lynx deodorant Axe deodorant for some reason instead. What the bloody hell is that all about? Imagine if the Atari Lynx was called the Atari Axe in some regions. That would be bloody nonsense. It would be almost as retarded as referring to the Sega Mega Drive as the bloody Genesis. Anyway, now I've killed some time talking about a poor man's aftershave and making some very clever puns, let's talk about the subject matter at hand, the Atari Lynx. Yeah! The Atari Lynx is a 1989 handheld gaming device. It is from the same generation of handhelds as the original Game Boy and features a full colour screen like that of the Sega Game Gear. This system was way ahead of its time, as unlike the Game Boy and the Game Gear's 8-bit, the Atari Lynx was a whopping 16-bit, making it technically more powerful than some of the games consoles on the market at the time, such as the NES and the Sega Master System. The Atari Lynx was a true handheld powerhouse, which could have made it capable of wiping the floor with all its competition in a variety of ways. The Atari Lynx's innovative features included being the first colour handheld with a backlit display, predating that of the Sega Game Gear. The system also has switchable right-handed, left-handed and upside-down configurations, which was a feature that got implemented into the Bandai Wonder Swan many years later. The Lynx also has the ability to network it with up to 17 other units via its Comlink system, although most games would network 8 or fewer players. Comlinks was a feature that was originally developed to run over infrared links and was codenamed Red-Eye, although this was changed to a cable-based networking system before the final release. The Lynx was also cited as the first gaming console with hardware supporting for zooming and distortion of sprites, featuring 4096 colour palettes and integrated math and graphics coprocessors. Its pseudo 3D colour graphics display was said to be the key defining feature in the system's competition against Nintendo's monochromatic Game Boy. The fast pseudo 3D graphics features were made possible on minimal hardware system by using stretched, textured triangles instead of full polygons. These particular features were achieved over a year prior to even the launch of the Super Nintendo, whose stock hardware features the comparable Mode 7, but which cannot scale sprites. In terms of the system's development history itself, we have to go all the way back to 1986. The Lynx system was originally developed by a company known as Epix, and was originally referred to as the Handy Game. In 1986, two former Amiga designers known as RJ McCall and Dave Needle had been asked by former manager at Amiga, Dave Morse, if they could come up with a design for a portable gaming system. Morse now worked at Epix, a game software company that had a recent string of hit games. Morse's son had asked him if he could make a portable gaming system, prompting a lunch with Mikao and Needle to discuss the idea. Morse convinced Mikao and Needle to develop the idea, and they were hired by Epyx to be part of the design team. Planning and design of the console began in 1986 and was completed by 1987. Sadly though, at the time Epyx were facing financial difficulties, so had to look for business partners in order to make the handy game a reality. Amongst those approached to back the handy game was Nintendo. David Morse, Dave Needle and Epyx boss Joe Horowitz flew to Japan to have a private meeting with Shigeru Miyamoto himself. The goal was simple for Epyx: sell the idea of the handy game to Nintendo. The Epyx team arrived in Japan and began to wine and dine with Nintendo staff. However, Needle was feeling uneasy, as something just wasn't quite right. Apparently Epyx had no planned presentation lined up and was just intending to make a pitch off the cuff. Epyx boss Joe Horowitz was convinced it would be fairly easy to hard sell Nintendo on their product. Horowitz went ahead with an extremely aggressive pitch, which apparently went on for quite some time. This pitch was in fact so strong that in fact it angered Nintendo, and they ordered the Epyx team to get out of their building. This however didn't stop Horowitz, as he just got even louder with his attempted hard sell. Nintendo slowly tired, and the Nintendo Rex brought something out to show the Epyx team. It was a pair of small boxes, each with a small handheld video game console inside. There was also a communication cable that enabled them to be played together, and it was all ready to go to the market immediately. That day, the Epyx team became the first non-Nintendo people to ever learn about the existence of the Nintendo Game Boy. The Epyx team were left both crushed and infuriated, and left wondering what they would do next. Despite this major setback, the Epyx team knew the Handy was an ambitious project, a full-colour 16-bit handheld console that was far ahead of its time. After much pondering, Horowitz decided to approach Atari. He made a phone call to Atari chief executive Jack Tramiel. Atari had previously tried its hand at producing a portable machine known as the Atari 2200, which was based on the Atari 2600. However, as time elapsed, Atari began to shift their focus away from console gaming altogether and got themselves more heavily involved in the microcomputer war against Commodore. Atari executive Jack Tramiel only began to show interest in the console market again after seeing the success of the NES. So of course, when he was introduced to the Handy for the first time, Jack saw it as a great potential route back to gaming dominance. After several meetings between Epyx and Atari, it was soon decided that Atari would manufacture and market the handheld, and Epyx would be responsible for producing the games, getting paid by Atari upon release of each title. Sounds like a nice mutually beneficial deal, right? Wrong. Very wrong in fact. There was a clause to this deal. Atari gave Epyx a 60-day deadline to iron out all of the bugs that needed to be rectified. This time period proved to be inadequate, and as a result Atari decided to punish Epyx by withholding payments for their work. Ultimately, this ended up sending Epyx into financial turmoil, which led them to going bankrupt. Atari gave Epyx one final lifeline, but it required them to hand over the Handy completely to Atari. Mikao and Needle then wanted to leave Epyx, but was advised to stay by their lawyers, as it would have been seen as an overt action to damage Atari, and if they left they would have almost certainly been sued. Due to this, the pair reluctantly stayed until the full handover of the system was complete. Eventually the Handy was released by Atari in September of 1989, and for marketing purposes was rechristened under a new name. After years of corporate bloodshed, the Atari Lynx was finally born. To be fair, I think that is perhaps the darkest beginning I have ever heard for a console or handheld to start in the world. Maybe this is the reason I got given one of these things for bloody free. Is the Atari Lynx cursed perhaps? Rejected by Nintendo, then stolen by Atari. That had to have been pretty rough for Epyx. Anyway, with the Lynx now in existence, Atari Corp changed the internal speaker and removed the thumbstick on the control pad before releasing the platform. The system was released initially retailing in the United States at $179.95. The Lynx started off successfully, and Atari reported that they had sold 90% of the 50,000 units it shipped in its launch month in the United States, with a limited launch in New York. US sales in 1990 were approximately 500,000 units, and by the end of 1991 it was reported that Atari had sold around 800,000 Lynxes. Apparently, over its lifespan, the Lynx sold 3 million units, which is 1 million less than that of the Sega Game Gear, and obviously nothing in comparison to the Game Boy's 16 million units. Ultimately, the Game Boy defeated the Lynx due to being more rugged, costing half as much, having a much longer battery life, and getting bundled with Tetris. The Game Gear also held some competitive advantages over the Lynx. Apart from it also being a full-colour handheld, it was slightly smaller and was backed up by significantly more games. In North America, the Game Gear took second place, and while in Europe sales of the Lynx were initially quite strong on the back of the popular Atari ST, it still could not compete with the software library of the Game Gear and was eventually pushed into third place. Retailers such as Game and Toys R Us continued to sell the Lynx well into the mid-90s, and on the back of the Atari Jaguar launch, helped by a magazine such as Ultimate Future Games, who continued to cover the Lynx alongside the new generation of 32-bit and 64-bit consoles. Despite the Game Gear and Game Boy outselling the Lynx still has some competitive advantages of its own. It features a full-colour screen unlike the Game Boy, and features a longer battery life than that of the Game Gear. It is by far the most powerful out of these three handhelds too, boasting the best handheld graphics for the time period. Before I had even researched into the system's history, someone on Twitter laughed at me for stating the Lynx felt a little bit like a portable Amiga. They said to me, "Don't you mean the Atari ST?" But it turns out my observation was correct all along, as the system's developer Dave Needle and RJ Macau were both members of the Amiga design team prior to developing the Lynx, so the Lynx is much closer to an Amiga descendant than it is an Atari ST. So, in some ways the Game Boy is like a portable NES, the Game Gear is like a portable Master System, and the Lynx feels a little bit like a portable Amiga. So all three are equally lovable and bring a distinct style to handheld gaming. But that's enough of hearing some of my initial impressions of the Atari Lynx for now. Let's hear from some other Lynx owners around the world, and why they choose to own the system. Yeah!
So the Atari Lynx was released just a few months after the Nintendo Game Boy in the US, and it was released even before the Sega Game Gear, but unfortunately it just did not sell well in the US. We all know how the Nintendo Game Boy did. Well, even the Sega Game Gear crushed the Atari Lynx in sales, and that doesn't surprise me. I don't know anybody who had it as a kid. I don't remember hardly seeing it for sale anywhere or even seeing commercials for it. The only reason I knew about it was from reading about it in magazines like Electronic Gaming Monthly and GamePro. But I did always think it was a cool system and was kind of interesting looking, but again, just never saw it anywhere. Well, as an adult collector, I recently picked up a complete in-box Atari Lynx, and I can tell you it's great. I'm a huge fan of Atari now, so this thing is right up my alley, and I mean, really, it looks fantastic. It's a great looking system, it's exotic looking. When you pull this thing out and show it to your friends, they're not going to know what it is because they either had a Game Boy or maybe a Game Gear. And like I said, if you like arcade games, like arcade conversions, there's some amazing Atari arcade conversions for this, and even a very active homebrew scene. So I would highly recommend, as an Atari fan and as a retro game fan, definitely collecting for the Atari Lynx while it's affordable.
G'day, Brian from Synth Spaces here. Meanwhile, in 1989, HES was distributing the Atari Lynx in this country, and it was up against right away the might of the Nintendo Game Boy, and the following year Sega Game Gear came on and pretty much squashed it from the market. It did enjoy some considerable sales though here for its duration. While I was writing for Megazone magazine, I actually got to be able to review some of the titles. The beauty of that was I get to keep all the library of Atari Lynx games. That was a pretty neat little bonus for me. But I really did enjoy the system myself. You've got beautiful games like Blue Lightning here, and you know, for the time this was a thing of marvel, but unfortunately if you look at it by today's standards, I mean, you could use this for self-defense when in a dark alley, I don't know. So, you know, it did fairly well in this country, but it just got squashed ultimately in the end, particularly by Sega. I mean, Game Boy was doing rather well, but Sega itself was just such a huge factor to go up against. and their library of well-known games like Wonder Boy, Shinobi, and a whole stack of others, it just killed the Atari here in this country.
Being a child of the 1970s, I've seen handheld gaming change an awful lot over the years, from the Game & Watch to dedicated handheld machines like these two. But then of course in 1989 that all changed with the release of something that looked like this, the Game Boy. But it was 8-bit and the world was changing. We were getting 16-bit consoles, which only could mean one thing: 16-bit handheld machine.
Sega Mega Drive, Commodore Amiga. Ah, look, the Atari Lynx. How much?
And so the Atari Lynx was born. Now this is a Mark II model, and as you can see, it's not exactly portable. It's quite a chunky device, and this is the smaller of the two models. The Atari Lynx 1 was a lot wider. However, it is a great system. There's some cracking games on it, really impressive, especially against the Game Boy. But the main trouble is it gets through batteries like there's no tomorrow. Also, of course, Nintendo had the upper hand when it came to third-party developers and publishers. Not so many people really publish games for this, other than Atari and a few others. Doesn't mean there isn't some great games on it, there really is. Great arcade conversion of Toki, Namco's Pac-Land, Atari's Road Blaster, and many more. But it really is quite a bulky system. Also, my other complaint about it is that when you take it out in the sun, the screen really becomes hard to see. Like on so many coloured handheld devices, it really is a problem.
I am Wolfspora, and I'm glad to know I'm not the only one that likes the Atari Lynx. It is a wonderful handheld. I mean, who wouldn't want color and backlight and all that wonderful stuff as a kid when all we had was the Game Boy with its many shades of green? You know, it wasn't even black and gray, it was green. However, I did love the handheld. It had some wonderful games to it. But I'll never forget going over to a friend's house and playing California games on the very first generation Atari Lynx as a kid. In fact, that's this one right here. A little beat up, but, you know, it's still the Atari Lynx. And I just thought it was so cool, and I remember thinking, man, this is really special with the zooming in on sprites and stuff like that. And back, you know, in the time of being a kid, I mean, that was a big deal. Nowadays, we take advantage of it, but it's pretty awesome. I also have myself the second generation Lynx, which is definitely tons better than the first gen. I never played the second generation as a kid, but it's pretty cool nonetheless. And I actually never owned an Atari Lynx, unfortunately. But now that I'm an adult, I'm, you know, really happy I got my hands on it. Is it worth playing today? For sure. The game library is actually a lot of fun. Todd's Adventures in Slime World is such an awesome platformer, probably my favorite on the system. Warbirds is great. The planes zoom in and out when you're in a dogfight. It's pretty cool, and of course, California Games is awesome. So yeah, thanks, Top Hat Gaming Man.
So, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Opinions on the Lynx from owners of the platform around the world. And when I say world, I suppose I really mean the splintered British Empire, aka the colonies. But world, planet Earth, British Empire, it's all the same bloody thing really, isn't it? But with regards to the Lynx, a super powerful system is all well and good. However, it is the games that make a system rather than its power itself. So right now, let's take a look at some of the best games the Atari Lynx has to offer. Earlier in this video, Since Spaces brought up a game called Blue Lightning. Blue Lightning is a pseudo-simulation computer game in which the player controls a military airplane. The game was one of the first games for the Atari Lynx, released way back in 1989. The game was received very well by critics at the time, and today you can kind of look at this game as Lynx's answer to Afterburner. Blue Lightning really did show off the hardware's graphical capabilities early on in the system's lifecycle. This is a truly superb little gem which requires you to shoot down wave upon wave of enemy fighters. The game features fast-paced frantic action and has a total of 9 levels which all feature varied colourful environments. The game gets repetitive here and there, but overall if it's a good blaster you're looking for, look no further than Blue Lightning. In Zybots, the player must travel through a 3D maze and fight against a series of robots known as the Zybots, whose mission it is to destroy all of mankind. I found both the graphics and gameplay in this one absolutely tantalising, and I find it crazy that this game was released on a handheld all the way back in 1991. This game is very well done and a great arcade conversion which does a good job of replicating its arcade counterparts. As great as the graphics are, its gameplay is what really matters, and personally I found this game a lot of fun. The game starts off relatively easy, but the difficulty goes up and soon it becomes a challenge to make it through the mazes alive. Overall, Zybots is a great title for the Lynx, and certainly a game I shall be dedicating more playtime to in the future. Alien vs Predator is an unreleased Link title that was cancelled before completion in favour of the Atari Jaguar version. However, an alpha version of this game can be found online today. The reason why I included this game in this video was that I wanted to show it off due to the insane graphics it has for something that runs on a handheld console from the 1980s. So I recommend you marvel at how this one looks in comparison to the offerings we were getting on the black and white primitive Game Boy at the time. Absolute madness, really. Todd's Adventures in Slime World is a rather unique game for the Atari Lynx. This 1992 game sees you thrown into a series of caverns in search of slime gems. Everywhere you go in Slime World, the place is obviously full of bloody slime. You need to constantly keep your water gun filled up in order to defeat your slimy foes. Slime World is quite a large place and it would take you a long time to explore this Metroid style environment. The design of Slime World is especially unique for its use of carefully moderated levels of danger. A player can sustain ordinary damage from many sources, and it adds up quickly, but there are also common invulnerability shields and pools of water that remove all damage taken when used. But there are also red enemies that when shoot result in a spray of red slime that can instantly kill even a shielded player, creating circumstances when it is best not to shoot foes. Overall, certainly one of the more unique games on the Lynx. Warbirds is a 1991 flight simulator that allows the player to become a World War I pilot. The game has 5 scenarios in which the player can fly against 1 to 3 enemy pilots on varying skill levels. The player can look ahead, behind, above and to the left or right of his plane. A variety of options can be altered to aid in shooting down the enemy planes, including turning on unlimited ammunition and changing the amount of damage the aircraft can take before it explodes. While flight simulators were primarily contained on the home computers at the time of this game's release, Warbirds is a good effort in the genre, especially when you consider it is merely a handheld entry. Perhaps my favourite game on the Atari Lynx is Chip's Challenge. The Lynx certainly has no shortage of puzzle games, but Chip's Challenge may be the finest of them all. In this game you must move Chip around each maze in search of a set number of computer chips. The game has clearly been programmed with a ton of love, which can easily be felt with how fun this game is. This game may have been ported to a number of different platforms, however this small fun puzzle fits the handheld nature of the Atari Lynx like a glove. Honestly, you have to play this one, it's so bloody good. So, there you have it ladies and gentlemen. I can sense some of your incoming thoughts soon to enter the comment section. Why didn't I include this game or that game in this video? Well, for those of you who want to watch even more content on the Atari Lynx, in the next week or two I am going to upload a further video, giving my thoughts and description on 50 of your top Atari Lynx games. So there will be plenty of time to discuss more about the games then. In terms of the Atari Lynx itself, is it worth playing today? Well, abso-bloody-lutely. Apart from being a powerhouse and being a quirky niche product, the Lynx stands apart. I feel the Atari Lynx brings a dose of unique charm to handheld gaming, and it is the closest thing in terms of game style and content that we have to a microcomputer in the palms of our hands. The whole thing just feels very Amiga-y, which is a lovely change of pace to the Japanese handhelds of the period we have become accustomed to. So, if you're yet to dive into the Lynx's library, then what are you bloody waiting for? Get in there and have some fun! Yeah! Thank you for watching today's video. A massive shout out to my content contributors in today's video: Synth Spaces, Mad 8 Productions, Retro Asylum and Wolfborough. For anyone who wants to see some more of these gentlemen, links for their YouTube channels and Twitters can be found in this video's description. Also further shout outs to Shizuka Kobayashi, Andrew Bazansky, Peter Dawn, Mike Frost, Edward O'Reilly and all of my other patrons. You really help motivate me to make this channel grow. If you are new to this channel, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. All of your feedback is taken on board. Feel free to click one of the annotations to watch one of my videos about the Sega Nomad, the Neo Geo Pocket Color or the Bandai Wonder Swan. Ta-ta and farewell.